Very good morning to you, or maybe by the time this video is out, it's good afternoon on a bank holiday Monday. Thank you all for joining me. I hope you're enjoying the extra day off this weekend, and the sun's out today, not like yesterday where it was a bit cloudy and rainy. There was no West Ham football to have ruined the weekend for you as well. Look, if you're new to the channel, please do hit the like button that's somewhere around there. Do become a subscriber of this channel. It's free to become a subscriber, and it will certainly help out the channel itself. And yeah, so what are we going to talk about today? Well, of course, the worst kept secret last week was finally out, or certainly the worst kept West Ham United secret was finally out. And that, of course, was the confirmation that Lopetegui had joined West Ham United to become the first ever head coach of the club. After Tim Steidten joined West Ham last summer, we kept hearing about this long-term project that Steidten was working on, and we were excited about what that could contain, what could it involve, and what was all this long-term project gonna look like. Well, I believe that the answer to some of that project has well and truly arrived. Steidten, who had been technical director of football at various other clubs in Europe, primarily Germany, is now helping to shape the future of the future direction of West Ham United. As mentioned in the show I did last summer when Steidten first joined, I said that he'd been responsible for ensuring that all the teams at a club were going in one direction, had the same sort of philosophy. That was from the academy teams through to the senior team and even the women's team as well. And so Steidten's arrival last summer was never going to be just about him creating only a philosophy and becoming some kind of glorified scout in the transfer market. It also meant something a little more significant. And that, of course, would be he would be the person that would bring in a successor to David Moyes. He would be the person to bring in the club's first head coach. And that's exactly what has happened. Now, as we all know, Steidten did much the same at his previous club, Bayer Leverkusen, where he brought in head coach Xabi Alonso. And he helped to create, alongside Alonso, he helped to create the foundations at the German club, which culminated in them reaching this season's Europa League final and winning the Bundesliga in order to qualify for Champions League next season. Now, with David Moyes gone, Steidten finally has the opportunity to continue working on a similar project at West Ham, to instill the philosophy that I've said that's going to go across the board from academy through to senior team, but also to build on the legacy that David Moyes has left behind. Steidten had been working on a short list of head coaches for quite some time, and Lopetegui was one of the prime candidates that he was targeting. Of course, there was a potential wobble, wasn't there, during last season in Steidten's plans. You see, the first half of the season, if you can remember, was going amazingly well at West Ham United. We'd just beaten Arsenal 2-0 away from home. We were riding high in the Premier League. We'd finished top in our Europa League group qualifying stage. And there were rumours that David Moyes might be offered a new deal to stay on at the club. But it was evident that Steidten was already hard at work even in that, helping to shape the kind of contract, the kind of deal offered to David Moyes. It was most certainly not going to be the same kind of deal that Moyes had enjoyed for the previous 4.5 years. The new offer was that he would be made, if he accepted, he'd be made head coach, which would allow Steidten the freedom to help shape the senior squad without hindrance or interference by Moyes. It was clear from the start that Moyes would never agree to such a deal. Hence his statement back in January that he said, you know, a deal was on the table, but he was going to wait and see if it was the right deal for him at the end of the season. He'll wait and see if it was the right deal for him and his family before any decision was made. Now, at that time, Moyes must have felt somewhat aggrieved to be offered a new deal where some of his powers would be stripped away. For those of you who might remember, when Moyes came back to the club for the second time and succeeded in steering us away from relegation, he held all the aces. The club were not going to make the same mistake that they did after Moyes replaced Bilic. This time they wanted to keep David Moyes at the club on a long-term deal. Now, Moyes accepted to do so, but the deal was completely on his terms. He wanted full control of running of the first team, which included the scouting and the signing of players. And that's exactly what he got. So after 4.5 years in charge, 3 of them being in Europe and a European trophy to boot, Moyes must have felt vindicated that his way was the right way. And I guess in the season that's just passed, when he was offered the head coaching role, Moyes took a gamble. He took a gamble in thinking that he could bring West Ham back into Europe again, either through winning the Europa League or through our Premier League position. And then, if we did end up back in Europe, he would go back to the negotiating table and demand that he remains as manager and not have his role diminished in any way. But clearly, that didn't happen. The tide was changing after yet another poor performance in the second half of the season, in which we won just 5 games, slipped out of Europe, and we finished 9th in the league. Now, for many would see that as a reasonable season, finish in the top half of the league, getting to the quarterfinal stages of the Europa League, etc. Some would see that as a bit of a success. But clearly, Moyes' tenure at the club was slipping away, and his strength at the club was slipping away, especially by not qualifying for Europe. So David Moyes, as we know, has now left. Julen Lopetegui was announced as head coach, and no sooner did Lopetegui arrive at West Ham, within hours of his arrival, he got his first headache at the club. And that, of course, was the news that Lucas Paqueta was to be charged by the FA for spot fixing. Welcome to West Ham United, Julen Lopetegui. It's going to be an interesting ride. However, I would wager that Lopetegui would have been fully prepared and aware of the possible outcome with Paqueta. Decisions like that by the FA don't just spring up in football. I dare say the board, Lopetegui, Steidten, had been made aware for quite some time that these charges were likely to come about around about this time of the year. With that, I would also imagine that Steidten and Lopetegui would have been working on several different plans for the future. One plan with Paqueta staying at the club and being made available for selection. One plan with Paqueta being sold and how that transfer money that we would have got for him was going to be spent. And one where the player would be banned and not able to play for West Ham, and the double whammy of not having the player and not having any money to use to replace him with. So given now that we know that the club are not going to be able to sell Paqueta in this transfer window, there's going to be a likely 85 million gap, £85 million gap in the transfer window. But I'll come to that in a moment as to how we're going to go about our business in the transfer window. In the meantime, Lopetegui has wasted no time himself in bringing in his own backroom staff in order to shape what's going to happen at West Ham United for the future. All 5 coaches that have worked with Lopetegui in the past during his coaching career at FC Porto, the national Spanish side, Real Madrid, Sevilla, and at Wolves. Now, the first coach to come in is assistant head coach Pablo Sanz at the age of 50. He's been Lopetegui's trusted number 2 for a decade, with the pair having first worked at Porto, where he was academy director. Sanz also joined Lopetegui at Spain, Real Madrid, Sevilla, and Wolves. But their relationship goes all the way back to 1995, when they were both players at Barcelona. Sanz obviously replaces Kevin Nolan, who left the club last week. And it was evident from the interviews that Nolan held that he was quite gutted at leaving West Ham United. And he did say he would have more than happily have worked under Lopetegui if asked to do so. Next coach is head of performance and assistant coach Oscar Caro, 38 years of age. He's worked with Lopetegui since 2016. He's a UEFA Pro license holder. He's worked as a fitness coach at various Spanish clubs and also in Qatar before joining Lopetegui with the Spanish national side. He replaces Jamie Osman, who also left last week. Next up is Juan Peinado, 50 years of age. He joined forces with Lopetegui originally at Sevilla. He's also managed various clubs. He's also been Real Madrid's academy coach as well. And he moved to Sevilla to work with Lopetegui for the first time in 2019. Next up is fitness coach Oscar Borja de Alba. 43 years of age. He began working with Lopetegui when he was head coach again at Sevilla. De Alba followed his head coach to Wolves in 2022 and is reunited with him for the third time in East London. He replaces fitness coach Nick Davis. Next up is, skip one. Next up is technical coach Edu Rubio, who actually needs no introduction to most West Ham fans. He spent the first part of the 22-23 season as West Ham United's women's assistant manager. Another UEFA Pro license holder. He's coached at Valencia's academy before moving to English football with the MK Dons back in 2010. Since then, he's worked as a coach at Chelsea, Crawley Town, and Crystal Palace before departing West Ham to join Lopetegui at Wolves in 2022. He replaces Alan Irvine. Anyone remember him? The only surviving coach that was under Moyes' tenure is Xavi Valero, who's our goalkeeping coach. Much respected, Valero is now working for the third person in charge of managing and coaching the senior team. He was brought into the club in 2018 when Manuel Pellegrini first became West Ham manager. After his departure, Valero continued to work under Moyes, and now that Moyes is gone, Valero will continue his role as a goalkeeping coach under Lopetegui. So now that's his backroom staff sorted. What about the player signings, and what about the players that Lopetegui is going to want? Now, we hear that Lopetegui wants a full 25-man squad at his disposal. We also hear and know that Lopetegui likes making full use of his subs bench during games. So those two things, a full 25-man squad and actually using all your subs during a game, is in very stark contrast to the way David Moyes operated when he was at the club. But in order for Lopetegui to have a full 25-man squad, he might need to bring in anything up to around 12 players in this transfer window. That's clearly not going to happen. Yeah, we may get maybe 2 or 3 players from the academy to add to that 25-man squad. But even then, Lopetegui will still need possibly up to 9 players, especially with the uncertainty surrounding some players who are rumoured to be leaving the club. Now, we also have the added issue that with a 25-man squad, 8 of those are going to have to be homegrown talents. And this is where it becomes a little bit interesting, because if all the players that we think could be leaving West Ham United do leave, Lopetegui may be starting with only 3 homegrown players at his disposal, and them being Aaron Cresswell, who we confirmed last week was staying with the club for another year, James Ward-Prowse, and Jared Bowen. Now, if you look on the right-hand side, players who have left or possibly leaving, you've got a number of homegrown players in there. You've got Ben Johnson, of course. You've got Danny Ings, Divin Mbama, and Flynn Downs, and as well Antonio. So there's quite a number of homegrown players with big question marks over their futures at West Ham. So it's going to be very interesting to see what Lopetegui does with these players and whether he wants to convince some or all of them to stay at the club. And that's why when it comes to sort of transfers and we keep hearing about all these players that we're going to get from overseas, I go a little bit cold over that. I'm not too sure just how accurate that reporting is. I dare say we will be buying players from abroad. I'm sure that we will. But I think the homegrown issue is the one that's quite important to get right before we start looking at any more overseas players. Now, there is a player who we did buy last season, who can add to the homegrown tally. And that is central midfielder Andy Irving, who we bought from Austrian Bundesliga club Klagenfurt last summer. But we bought the player for something like $1.5 million and loaned him straight back out to the Austrian club. Now, I was told that, it's not likely that he will ever play for West Ham United, but I'm not so sure. The former under 21 Scottish international has had a pretty decent season at Klagenfurt. He helped the club reach 6th in the Austrian Bundesliga, scoring 10 goals and making 5 assists. And we understand that he's already said goodbye to his teammates at the Austrian club in order to prepare to join West Ham for pre-season. So if he does join, let's say for argument's sake, all those players that I've listed here do leave West Ham United, and West Ham United start with only 3 homegrown players. If Irving came to West Ham, that would make 4 homegrown talents. Now, there's also a suggestion that 2 goalkeepers that we have, Joseph Anang, who's been our third choice keeper over the last couple of seasons, and who's also helped to make up the homegrown tally, Joseph Anang, and Nathan Trott, who's been out on loan for quite a number of years, might be leaving the club this summer. And therefore, we're going to need a third keeper. And again, in order to help with the homegrown tally, we could be promoting Christian Heggie as our third choice keeper. He's 21 years of age. He's been out on loan, just enjoyed a recent spell, a decent spell at Danish club Den Bosch, went very well. He's a Hungarian under 21 international. He has been called up by the Hungarian national side, but has yet to make his senior debut. Now, Heggie is highly regarded at West Ham United, and he would qualify as homegrown because he has spent 3 seasons since 2019 when we bought him at the West Ham Academy. Now, the homegrown requirements is you're either obviously you're born in Britain, or you can you can become a homegrown player if you've spent 3 seasons at the academy of a club, which is what Heggie has done. So he could also add to the tally of homegrown players, which will build it up. Now, Lopetegui still has to make a decision as to what to do with some of the other homegrown talents in the club. I've already mentioned them, but also other players as well. Does Ben Johnson definitely leave? We hear that Johnson is definitely has not accepted a contract at West Ham and could be joining Crystal Palace this summer. Ogbonna, we feel that it is Ogbona's time. It just turned 36 years of age, so he's not likely to stay. Another player, Agurd, isn't happy at West Ham and could be leaving, but and Maxwell Cornet being another. But the number of homegrown talents that we have in here with question marks, Divin Mabama is rumoured to not being offered a new contract. Danny Ings, we hear that we will be open to offers for the player. And now that given that Southampton have just been promoted, it could possibly be Danny Ings going back to that club now that they're back in the Premier League. Antonio, still question marks over his future and what will happen with Antonio. We keep hearing that Antonio wants one last big payoff, which may result in him going to either Saudi or the MLS. So there's quite a few question marks over a number of players. And then, of course, we've also got Flynn Downs. Congratulations to him and Southampton for getting back in the Premier League. And he's been instrumental, Flynn Downs, in helping that club achieve that. And we hear that Southampton want to make his loan spell permanent, but it's going to be quite interesting to see what Lopetegui does with him and the other homegrown players, whether he wants to keep them or not. Now, if of all these players, I think it's going to be interesting to see which ones he might want to keep homegrown wise. I don't think Johnson will stay. I don't think Ings will stay, and I don't think Mabama will stay. However, if Downs does stay, that will increase our homegrown talent again to around about 7. It will mean that we'll have James Ward-Prowse, Aaron Creswell, Bowen, Andy Irving, Christian Heggie, Antonio, and Flynn Downs at the club, which will make 7. Now, of course, we could bring in, like I mentioned earlier, 1 or 2 young players from the academy to join the 25-man squad, but you don't have to name anyone under 21 in this senior squad, leaving that space open for another player from possibly from overseas. But it could also mean that we might be targeting a couple of Chelsea players that have been mentioned several times before in Trevor Chalobah, who is a centre back, and Conor Gallagher, midfielder. We hear that Chelsea have got problems with their finances. They're going to have to sell 1 or 2 of their prized assets. We're looking for a potential replacement for Lucas Paqueta in midfield, and we need to strengthen our defence in central defence. And both Chalobah and Gallagher could be prime candidates to replace to fill those voids. So that's why I don't get too excited at this moment in time when I keep hearing stories about the players that we're going to be bringing in from abroad. Because if we can get the homegrown quota sorted out, then we know where we stand and we start to look at the alternatives from abroad. Now, one of those players from abroad is rumored to be Brazilian centre back Fabrizio Bruno. We keep hearing that the signing is going to be imminent. Now, interestingly, we heard on Sunday that, we heard last week that there were 3 priority places that Lopetegui and Steidten were looking at: 2 centre backs and a striker. They were priorities. And then on Sunday, we heard that there'll be 3 players imminently coming into West Ham, probably by the end of June. Now, we don't have names or positions as to who those players may be, but it's been confirmed by Sean Whetstone that we will have 3 players signed for West Ham as soon as the transfer window opens, all completed by the end of June. I dare say there'll be other players as well, but there'll be 3 coming in apparently by the end of June. Now, one of them could be Fabrizio Bruno. Like I said, central defender, Brazilian central defender, plays for Flamengo. 28 years of age. He's kind of an interesting choice for me. He doesn't necessarily possess much pace, which is kind of crucial for defenders in the Premier League. And he's only ever played his football in Brazil. And you would think that if he was that good at 28 years of age, perhaps 1 or 2 other teams might have come in and snapped him up by now. The deal is rumored to be worth around 15 million, as Bruno's only recently signed a contract extension at his club, Flamengo, till 2028. He's made 2 senior appearances for his international side, both earlier this year, where he played in the 1-0 win over England and then drew 3-3 against Spurs against Spain, both in March. I'll keep an open mind about Bruno. He may possess, my understanding is he does possess the technical ability that Lopetegui looks for in a player. He's progressive and a good passer of the ball. So let's see if that materializes. Now, why Brazil? Why South America? Well, if you recall, in 2022, Rob Newman did go out to Brazil to forge scouting relationships with 4 clubs over there: Botafogo, Fluminense, Vasco da Gama, and indeed Flamengo itself. Now, that was to primarily look for raw talent, and it resulted in us bringing in Luizão, who went straight into the academy side when we signed him. Tim Steidten himself is no stranger to the South American market as well. And he himself flew out to Brazil in April, which is why it's been suggested that we're looking to bring in Bruno and also Corinthians Wonderkid Wesley Gassova. Now, This one is interesting as well because we keep hearing that the deal for Gassova keeps changing. Apparently, the original deal was going to be something like £15 million, and then it went to around 20. And now we hear that Corinthians are apparently changing the goalpost again and are looking for around about 30 million for this player. It seems obvious that what they're trying to do is to start a bidding war amongst European clubs for this talented winger. So going back to what West Ham United need at this stage, I think I'm going to be more interested, like I've already said, in the players that we can add, which will increase our homegrown tally before we look at players from abroad. But it's going to be quite interesting to see how the transfer window goes. We've been hearing that this, as I said a moment ago, that the primary focus is on 2 central defenders and a striker. And now we hear that there'll be 3 players coming into the club, signed for the club by the end of June. It's going to be an interesting summer to see what Lopetegui and Steidten do to show their intent with their summer transfer activity. I dare say we're going to have loads more rumours between now and when the season kicks off. We've got Euros in between as well. So watch out for more news as it happens.